Hey everyone, this is Ben, and I'm back doing some poker, playing one table of 10 cent, 25 cent heads up, and one table of 6 max, 25 cent, 50 cent. I wanted to give this format a try just because I felt like there might be decently more action, always action going, so I can focus on the 10 cent, 25 cent table and get almost a hand, every a playable hand every time, and also focus on the 25 cent, 50 cent table. So on the right here, we're going to bet twice. Decent number of draws, 7, 9, 9, 10, and spades. On the left, we're going to check it. Actually, we'll probably c-bet here with our backdoor flush draw and our overcards to second pair. We're going to 3-bet on the right here. 7-6 suited, definitely within the 3-bet range or a reasonable 3-bet range. It flops pretty well, and while it doesn't block anything, I think the playability of the hand makes it worthy of a 3-bet. So we'll see how this goes. If this ends up being too much action, I might switch back to just 2 tables of 6 max. I felt like 2 tables of 6 max on their own weren't enough action to keep a conversation going, aside from a strategy conversations that happened outside of the tables by themselves. So I'm trying to mix it up a little bit and see if we can play with just get some more action, some more hands with 2 tables, one with heads up. So again, the HUD isn't working very well. Sometimes this happens. If I maximize it, sometimes it improves the HUD, but we get 3-bet here on the right. I'm gonna call in position with Jack 10 suited. We flop pretty well. Obviously, flopping a flush draw is excellent. We're going to be calling here, since raising, we don't rep many of the strong hands, given that he has most of them, and there's a lot of flush draws out there. So we don't want to be too weak and always raise in this spot. It's an interesting card. I'm definitely going to bet and hope to fold out like pocket 9s, pocket 10s, pocket jacks. We do have a lot of ace-x hands that call the 3-bet. Not the strongest ones, but a decent number. And the jack and 10 are some good blockers. In the sense we block ace 10, ace jack. We also block jacks and 10s, which are hands that we want him to have so that he can fold. So let's see if I can maximize. There we go. I don't know why that works, but it tends to work. Okay, queen 4 suited, definitely an open on the right here. King 8 off, under the gun, going to be a fold. I'm going to switch this to the 6 max profile I have. On the right here, I'm going to c-bet. I think it's going to be very hard to play if we just check and literally any card rolls off, aside from a flush draw card or a straightening card. It's one of those spots where like the backdoor draw, it's like not too bad if he calls, but it becomes, because some fraction of the time you're ahead and some fraction of the time you'll improve with your backdoor draw, or improve your equity with your backdoor draw when it gets there on the turn, or the draw comes in on the turn. But it doesn't come often enough that you can check and then just call when he bets. I mean, he's going to continue on betting like 90% of the time when we check that flop. He'll bet the turn or some fraction like that. So it's going to be a little bit too hard to play back as a check, but is much easier to play as a bet. So going to 3-bet ace-king suited here. If we get a 4-bet, we'll definitely be going with it. Okay, I'm going to check this spot. I think we can check call with our ace-high. It's a pretty good card for us. I'm going to check again. I don't think there's any reason to bet. It's super unlikely that we'll get a better hand to fold like any overpair or any single pair. And obviously it'd be super annoying to bet and get raised and fold any of our ace-high equity. Pretty big pot here on the right. Aces 10-7, ace-queen. Very strange. We're going to call one here after she checks the flop. He can have a lot of just draws or pair draws here, and I think ace-high reckons to be the best hand more often than not after he checks the flop. And we can also improve with an ace or a king. Speak of the devil. So you could consider leading there, because I think very often, that's an interesting check that on that spot. I was saying you can consider leading just because very often we have an ace, and the way we play that hand, very often we have an ace, and we would be probably betting the flop. We have an ace because we checked the flop and didn't bet when we would bet like all of our overpairs. And so if the hands we're playing that way are more often than not just kind of like strong ace highs that don't have enough backdoor equity, either with a flush draw or a straight draw to continuation bet there. And so because on the river we very often have ace high, when we connect with that ace, we're going to want to bet just lead some of the time as a bluff. And if we're going to leave some of the time as a bluff, then we should also do it with some of our strong or our good ace x hands that when they're called are likely ahead. And still check some of our ace x hands as bluff catchers. Gonna see a bet here with our backdoor flush draw and king high. I tend to check these spots when I don't have the backdoor flush draw and bet them when I do. Once we get that call, we don't pick up any additional backdoor equity or any more additional equity. I think it just makes sense to play as a check. Not many hands that are better at folding here. Jack's an interesting card. Obviously 4-5 ace, 4-5 and like 4-6 miss. But he has a decent number of ace highs. I don't think we can rep many of them unless we overbet here, as if we have hit a jack. So I'm just going to check back and hope to be ahead of 4-5 or 4-6. E6 makes a decent amount of sense. Going to open queen 10. Going to c-bet here. Smaller than just a normal size c-bet. Since this board is so good for our range. Going to call queen 3 suited. So he floats. It's not a great hand for us to bluff if we hit like a king or a jack, an 8. I could see continuing. I don't think this is a good spot to put another street in. It just doesn't seem very likely he's going to fold, and he doesn't have that many floats that are going to fold now. Interesting. On the right here, I think I'm going to fold even with the backdoor draw. I'm thinking of bluffing here on the left as a raise, but I would imagine that we would have bet the turn. So with our diamonds, and as a result, I don't think he's going to fold an ace, and can have a decent number of strong two pairs, like a6 or something like that, that are never going to fold. So I figured that it might just make more sense to play it as a call. I mean, as just a fold in that spot. And in other situations where we do barrel turn, then we turn those situations into bluff spots. Obviously, I was considering because we had the 10 diamonds, and the 10 diamonds can be a good bluff card there. Jack 10 to send off. I'm going to call 3-bet here. Pretty reasonable hand. Some connectivity. It's a Broadway connectivity, so you flop the best straights, and you can flop reasonable pairs. So, and you obviously don't have the reverse implied odd situation, so I'm going to call here. Interesting. I think I have a lot of bluffs here with all of our single clubs, so I'm going to put an ace into this betting spot. So he just checks it. I'm going to bet, and so we can represent the queen on later streets if we hit our straight or our backdoor flush comes in. So on the left here, I'm a little bit worried that he has a better ace-x, but the king is a good card for that, so I'm going to bet here. Obviously now our hands are as aces, threes, pocket aces, threes with the king kicker. So I'm a little bit less worried about a better ace. Cool. And also betting there because we can have all of the missed flush draws as well. And you're going to want to be able to, since you're going to have bluffs, you're going to need to have a decent number of value hands. It would have been interesting if the ace hadn't come, how we would have responded. So we flop ace high, backdoor draw, not a great backdoor draw, but I think a reasonable one given that there are so many combinations of bluffs that this person can have. It's a good and a bad card. It brings a flush and pairs the board. I'm going to bluff here. The reason why I'm bluffing here is because I think he would continue with single spades that were complete air balls on the turn. So, and those are the kinds of hands that we don't want him to have, because if he has them, he's super unlikely to fold the river. So if he's going to continue with those kinds of hands and he didn't continue, I think it's likely he doesn't have a spade or any kind of spade at that point. In which case, he has either a pair, which is better than our hand, or he has a hand that's a complete airball, and it's likely he's going to turn that into a bluff on the river. And so I think my hand plays better as a bet there than as a check call. Well, it can't be a check call, just a check fold. So he leads. It's interesting. How does the queen 10 off play into my range here? I think it's high enough that we can call, but it's really borderline. And I guess I'm going to fold just so that, you know, if I'm going to pick spots to fight back for the first time he leads, I want to have slightly better hands. If he makes it more of a play, then we'll turn the queen 10 off into a call there. I'm going to 3-bet king 4 suited. In position, I think it's a good enough hand to 3-bet, and it's going to be hard for this opponent to play back at us besides just 4-bet bluffing or 4-bet value betting. On these kinds of flops, obviously, we just have a massive edge and can just bet and get a lot of folds. So with the queen high, pretty bad backdoor draws, I'm just going to fold. Small check raise. We have a pretty bad hand. Just going to let this one go. On the 5-4 suited on the right, we're going to make a call. Interesting flop. Definitely going to play this fast just because of the flush draw. So he can represent a lot of bluffs, and obviously he can have a lot of hands that, if not are like hands that are not ahead of us now, but you know, can be ahead of us very shortly. Yeah, like one of these hands. Got a fade a club, and we do. So this is the kind of hand that has a ton of equity against us at the point that we raise, and we want to either induce bluffs and call off those bluffs to get max value, or to induce folds. So, I mean, not induce folds, but to get folds, because a hand with a club in it is still fairly live. I mean, decently live against our particular hand at that spot. So that went pretty well. Pretty fast session. On the right here, up, a buy-in and some. Down on the left here, about a third of a buy-in, I'd say. Sorry, like a quarter of a buy-in. So not so bad. We can see what other games are running at this point. There is another 10-cent, 25-cent. I did feel like that was a little bit more frantic, and I was paying more attention to the 25-cent, 50-cent, or to the 10-cent, 10-cent, 25-cent game, which made it harder to pay attention to the 25-cent, 50-cent game, or to balance fairly what I was paying attention to. So I think I'm going to try to get into another 6 max game. Cool. So we're sitting there. I'm going to close out this heads up table. Booked a nice win. It can be sometimes hard to play 2 different stakes at the same time. It requires a little bit more attention to make sure that you're doing proper things as sizing. I think with the table count that we're running right now, only 2 tables is not so bad. And that doesn't really bother me. 3 deuce off, just a terrible hand. I'm just going to muck it. Going to call with pocket fives in the big blind here. Obviously a pretty strong hand to have in the big blind. 4-8 suited is going to be a fold here, especially to a 3-bet. Going to check this back. I actually want to bet this with our backdoor draw and a lot of scare cards. I mean, any ace, king, queen, 10, like just so many cards that are hard to play against if they fall. And this is a hand that can get value from like ace high or a 4 or a flush draw. And I don't see many people going for check raises here with if they just have a bare flush draw. So that's a hand that would be behind us but could get us to fold. They usually just lead those. And if they do go for check raises, they go for check raises with their strongest hands. Obviously, that makes them not balanced, but yeah, I don't think people are super balanced at these stakes. 4 deuce suited, it's going to be an open. Again, I'm going to have to try to fix this. See, maximizing, see if that brings the HUD up. It does, nice. Gonna fold 5 deuce off. Change the 6 max profile, and I'm going to check this one, just 0 equity. It really smashes his big blind defend range, and it's going to be like almost impossible for us to turn a bluff into a profitable play. That's an interesting card. It is a card we can bluff at. We would check this flop with ace high a decent amount of the time. It's also a card that he can represent. And again, I just think we have so little of this board. You can argue like a really small bet. Just try to get him to fold to like... No, I think this is just a check give up. I don't want to play sneaky games like this. Okay, he induced me. I'm firing. We have the worst hand we can have here, and we can have some straights. So I'm gonna fire away. Right, we can just have like jack deuce suited that opens and just gives up on such a terrible board. So given that we can have some straights, like a random 6, like a random 10, jack, I think we can open with, we can bluff there. I don't know why it won't let me open. Okay, well, guess we're making it 0.85. So I've played JoyDoc on a different account, a different computer. King 3 off is going to be a fold. I don't remember that much about him, but I remember his handle. I've also played this person, 38979, a decent amount. I know that he is very much a regular at 25 cent, 50 cent one. So I imagine that this person's on the stronger side of the player pool that we have here. I'm going to 3-bet King Jack against the button. And I'm going to 3-bet Jack 10 suited. For different reasons. One, I just think King Jack, you need to 3-bet if you want to play against, play it as a small blind, play it in the small blind. Otherwise, you cap your range and you get barreled off too easily on non-pair boards. And you just don't flop a pair enough of the time to play it, effectively. Jack 10 suited, I open for a different reason. I think Jack 10 suited is just a much stronger hand than in some senses than King Jack off. It has a more playability on flopping flush draws and a little bit more connectivity. And I really don't think the King actually helps you that much more than the 10 does. The other reason is I think this player is actually is potentially weak, given they did not bet on that 8-7-9 ace 10 board. I would have expected at least some bluffs there, and not a huge read there, but it's possible that this is not the kind of player that fights back unless they've got strong hands. I don't know why this is not working. Maybe we'll just be making it 3/4 pot or full pot instead of 3x for the rest of the game, since I can't make that button work. So we get 3-bet. Deuce 4 suited is definitely going to be a fold, one of the worst hands we can have against a complete unknown. Even against a known player who had some sort of leak, I'm not sure how 4 deuce suited could exploit it, unless they were, they just always folded to 4 bets, and if they don't have it, then maybe you could make an argument for 4 deuce suited being a 4-bet, but I think that's probably just too insane. Gonna fold the 6-3 off. It's strange to me. It feels like 2 tables of 6 max are too slow, but 2 tables, 1 of 6 max, 1 of heads up is a little bit too fast. King 4 is a fold. 8-6 off is a fold. 9-3 off is a fold. So obviously our VPIP is pretty high here, but we were playing small sample and we were playing 3-handed for a large portion of that. We can take a look at the stats. It looks like this player we have some history against. Gonna open 8-4 suited. Can flop some straights. And can flop some flush draws. Always a good kind of hand to open on the button. So you get 3-bet. I don't have that much information on this player, but I think 8-4 suited is not one of the hands I need to defend. I'm not opening super wide on this button. I'm folding King 4 off probably, or Queen Deuce off. 8-4 suited is on the edge of the hands I open. It's definitely an open, but it's not like a slam dunk open. Probably the bottom 15% of hands I open, and I only need to be defending against a pot size 3-bet you know, calling 50% of the time for it to be to not for me not to be exploited. So there's just as a result, I mean, a bottom 15% of the hand doesn't need to be one of the hands you fight back with. I'm gonna fold 3-6 of diamonds. I'm a little bit tempted since he folded last time, but I feel like eventually they'll get suspicious and start playing back, and I don't want to have a hand with no blocking, no blocks, and pretty weak connectivity to be the hand that I pick to get in that situation with. So it looks like Poker Tracker has no specific reads on any individual players. What they'll do is if they see a hand get shown down, they'll derive some insights for you, such as they play turn draws aggressively, or they, I don't know, play over pairs aggressively, or something like that, or weakly, or whatever. So that can be helpful and nice if you are not you're playing a lot of tables and you don't have time to take notes individually on a lot of people. You can just use Poker Tracker's notes. So we're down just a little bit on the left here. Only 20% of our stack has been lost. I could reload. I don't super care either way. I think my, 80 big blind game is pretty as much as good as my 100 big blind game. It takes a little bit of stack adjustment, but not enough that I think it's, that big of a deal to reload or not reload. We could consider pulling up another table. See what else is going on out there. Another 20 cent, 10 cent, 25 cent game. A couple of these are going. I don't recognize anyone on any of these tables. So yeah, I mean, we could go and play 4 tables. King 10 off, going to be a fold. Let's pull up. Yeah, I don't recognize any of these players. I'm okay, I think, sitting on the 2 tables for now. It's enough time that if we get into a big hand, we can go back and talk it over. And I think I can spend some time looking at the stats. So, over small samples, we have one decently heavy 3-better. Only 1 out of every 5 times. The sample is so small, it's not even worth really thinking about. The sample is slightly bigger, but still pretty small. Gonna fold 8-5 off. And it's not to say that you can't figure out anything from small samples, but it just means you have to heavily discount anything that you tried to derive from them. Gonna defend 6-3 suited. Obviously, I think I'm defending most suited hands in the big blind. Maybe not obviously, but I think you should be defending most suited hands in the big blind. Flop backdoor, flush draw, backdoor, straight draw. Pretty weak combination of both. That is going to say, depending on the sizing, I'll figure out what to do here. I think this is just a fold. We can have actual straight draws, actual flush draws that we want to play as raises here. And our calls can be single pairs, So I don't think we need to make this hand into one of those spots, into one of those plays. Gonna see bet our pretty weak hand here. We're really just looking for a fold, hoping he has like 8-9 off, or king 7 or something. Even hands that either have equity or are better than us. There's not really much we can do if we don't bet, since they'll probably just either bluff turn and get us to fold. And they don't. If we bet, and there are there'll be lots of hands that will bluff turn if we check to them, but just will fold here since we've shown strength and we haven't given an opportunity to just try to bluff us off a hand. So we flop bottom pair backdoor flush draw. I'm going to play this as a check. We have much stronger hands that can bet all of our ace x and even if our 10x's. And then weaker hands like our pure backdoor flush draws with no pairs, or gutters, or open-enders like 9-7. I'm going to check again. I think, again, there's not much to say in terms of value at this point after a check, and no reason to try to bluff with this particular hand. King 6 suited, I think, is a fold under the gun, even 5-handed. All right, we're playing a call here for sure. We could have worse hands like 5s or 4s or 3s that fold. Going to be check calling this. Yeah, I was going to say I'd expect to win the majority of the time if it goes, 3 checks and we've got third pair. So ace queen off on in the big blind. I'm going to be playing this as a 3-bet if it gets open to us. All of our stats are pretty tight-ish. Very good flop for us. I'm going to continue with, it's a very, very dry board. So it's going to be hard for our opponent to call or float if we bet very big. But since we're so likely to be ahead, I want to get some value. So I'm going to bet something like this size, $3, which is what I would bet if we had like bluffs as well. So you get 3-bet here on the left. I'm going to 4-bet my 7-4 suited, ace 4 suited. I think it's a good 4-bet since you block a decent number of hands. And okay, get a fold there. We'll talk about the hand in a sec, but I'm just going to continue on this board. Going to bet a little bit bigger this time, since the flush draw got there. So they can have more draws and can play back against us more effectively. If we bet small, we're giving them a great price with any draw. So the draws miss. I can't imagine. I'm just going to check here and call, I think, and try to bluff catch. I think if we bet that there's just too many hands that they can fold. Okay, looks like we win. So the reason why I check there is because hearts miss, and if they have hearts, they're going to have to turn their hand into a bluff. But they can also have a decent number of strong hands that are never going to fold if we bet. Hands that are like, single 7s that became trips on the river. There are some weaker hands, like 10s or 9s or 8s that we can get value from and are never going to bluff. But a decent number of time, those like 10s or 9s or even jacks turn themselves into re-raises pre-flop. So it's a very small range of value hands, maybe just 8s or 9s. Hands or potentially like king queen, which we do block. So I don't think there are too many value hands that are going to be able to call down 3 streets, because even 8s or 9s will fold when you bet there. So maybe like only specifically like king queen or queen 10 suited are the kinds of hands you can get value from. And then there are so many I floats on the flop because we bet very small that then turned into draws on the turn that could call a bigger bet that I think can definitely bluff on the river when all the bluffs miss and we check, or all the potential bluffs miss and we check. So I want to protect myself from being bluffed off that spot by, maybe just someone, we bet twice there with bluffs ourselves, like ace X hands that turn into flush draws, and we want to be able to check there some of the time and not just get barreled off by open enders on the turn or flush draws on the turn that turn themselves into barreling or betting bluffs by the river. And to protect ourselves, I think we can turn a hand like ace queen into just a check call there. Since it's not the strongest hand we can have, even though it's pretty close to the effective nuts. Um, but not the effective nuts. So we want to be able to protect ourselves to some degree. The ace seven suited hand that I 4-bet here, I felt that this player had a pretty big 3-bet percentage, even though it's a small sample. I'm going to fold the a10 off here. And some of the time we're going to want to be able to fight back against that with some bluffs. Obviously, we're going to be calling like the jack 10 suited, the 10-9 suited, all of like those like connected middling suited hands. And so the bluffs we're going to want to have, I think, are reasonably well suited aces that block the best hands and can have a decent amount of equity if you do get into a 5-bet spot. Gonna 3-bet. I'm 3-betting this hand because, again, I don't like playing these as calls out of position, and we block a decent part of his range while having great equity against the calling range. I think I'm going to check call this spot. And I'm going to check again. If we bet here, we're too weighted towards ace X hands that check the flop. Gonna check on the left as well. Pretty mediocre run out, but I guess that's the way it works with pocket fours. So I'm going to bet for value here. He can have queen X or nines or something like that. I don't think that he's ever going to bluff if we check to him. So I think just like a half pot bet is probably like the most annoying sizing, I would say, if he has kind of a weak. Obviously, the queen's also good in the sense that like we're no longer losing to ace jack or ace 10 or ace 8 or ace 9. So it has to be one of the best cards we can value bet on because it counterfeits hands in some senses that were previously beating us, and doesn't really give our opponent any more hands to be beating us by. So ace king and pocket nines, two pretty strong hands. I feel like we've been running pretty well in this video, which is always the best way to run. Now, of course, we're just going to get stacked on both tables. He's pretty tight. I'm actually just going to call here. It's not a huge sample, and this could just be, this is obviously a winning play, but it might not be an optimal play. Great spot to check. Not much value, not much sense and protection. Pot sit. Guess we'll call one. Not super thrilled, but with the queen, backdoor or queen draw, and nines could just be the best hand against any ace high or random flush draw. I want to be able to defend here. I don't want to be bluffed too easily. And just pot pot. You know, we can definitely have trips. We can definitely have pocket fours are now boat. We have like fives, sixes, and sevens that have to fold, but they fold the flop. This is one of the worst hands we can have, so I'm just gonna fold. Not super thrilled about it, but I don't think you need to call twice. Even on that river, which is such a safe river. 3-4 suited, I would open in the cutoff, but I think the hijack is a little bit too weak. With 4 players left to act, I've been opening a bunch of hands recently I would not expect to get played back at. I mean, I would expect to get played back at more often than than normal. Still no machine generated reads on any players here. We have a little bit more of a sample, but still pretty mediocre compared to what you're going to want to make a lot of adjustments against players. And I think that's an interesting question. Like, how many hands do you need before you can start seriously using these stats to your advantage? And I wouldn't be surprised if you need something closer to, I don't know, 500 hands, 400 hands. I mean, so the other thing is, I'm thinking 5 or 400 hands at heads up, but they're actually playing each one of those hands when you play heads up much more involved than they're playing when they're doing a six max table. And so I think you probably need 3 times that to get six max, so something like 1,500 hands maybe to really get some solid exploitative reads against opponents. That still feels like maybe too many. Maybe it's less than that. Maybe like 1,000. But yeah, but clearly like 100 hands is absolutely nothing, and there's really nothing you can learn from having 100 hands on someone. Just taking a look at this particular player's stats. Oh, it's cutting out. Okay, this player's stats. I mean, all of these spots where they're looking at like the 3-bet percentages, there's so many small. The sample is so small, right? Okay, so they never 3-bet. Versed a small blind or in the small blind or verse position. So verse small blinds, they never 3-bet. They're 0 for 2 for 3-betting in small when they're like I guess in the big blind versus small blind open. Such a small sample. Gonna fold the 9-7 off. So I think this is obviously like a much more reasonable VPIP and PFR, but we did play like 15 hands, like four-handed, so that's why the VPIP and PFR is so high over here. Gonna defend 5-4 suited. Doesn't make sense, I think, to 3-bet. Don't block anything, but have decent connectivity, so you can play small pots in the beginning and build them up bigger as your hand strength improves. So you flop very well, I would say. Obviously, the 3 diamonds on the board gives a potential for a flush, and the 6 for a straight. I'm gonna bet here. I think you can have a decent number of. I'd have a decent number of bluffs. A lot of single diamonds. I'm a little bit worried that I would also have a decent number of sevens, and so maybe my range is too strong, and the 5-4 it needs to be actually closer to the bottom. That's just a terrible card. So I have 6s and 5s. I'm just gonna check here. And hope the 5 is good. Nice. Oh yeah, so what I was saying is was a little bit worried that it'd be, since I'd have, a number of sevens, that 5-4 isn't as strong as it might look, um, in terms of where it fits in the number of hands I can have there. And it might actually become one of the good hands to just bluff catch with, because a lot of single pairs will have to fold, like a single 4 probably has to fold, or a single 5 probably has to fold. But 5-4 can call, and probably call lots of rivers as well. All the blank non-diamond rivers, 5-4 can almost certainly call. So it could be a good hand to also just check. King 8 off, I'm going to fold. Check 5 off is a fold. We should go through and rate the names of all of our opponents. So on the 1 to 5 scale, 300 BB, I think is a cheeky name. It implies they've got a deep stack, which means they've won. I'd give that a 3 out of 5, matching the number of big blinds. I don't know this, how to even say this. D3 Acnel or something? I don't understand it, so I'm going to make it 2 out of 5. Not clearly offensive or terrible, but also not clearly understandable. Defiant FC I think is pretty awesome. I'm going to give that a 4 out of 5. LAD Asaden 15. Pretty mediocre to me. Can't see any cheeky references or funny comments. It's a 2 out of 5. Porcelain God. Okay, that seems pretty bad. Give that a 1 out of 5. Gonna fold the Queen 6 off. Though I would have made a decent hand on this board with Queen 6 off. Gonna c-bet with our Jack High. Not a great hand, but the backdoor flush draw I think makes this definitely a c-bet. Especially this opponent who's pretty tight and is unlikely to fight back. Just for fun. Do 7 off, definite fold. So yeah, I guess a little commentary on the strength of the tables. I feel like the 10-cent, 25-cent game is fairly weak. I think the 25-cent, 50-cent game is also pretty mediocre. As I've said before in previous videos, I do feel as if there's a decent gap between 25 cent and 50 cent. 25 cent, 50 cent, and 50 cent a dollar. And then I think an even bigger gap on anything that's over 50 cent a dollar. I don't know how it would fare at some of those higher stakes, since I haven't really played anything bigger than, the biggest thing I've played is $1, $2 six max, which I felt was okay. I wasn't super impressed, but I thought it was a pretty reasonable group of players. Definitely better than any like $1, $2 casino game by a large margin. Yeah, I guess I felt like $1, $2 was going to be much harder than it ended up being. Admittedly, a small sample. Gonna check this back. King high could be good, and I don't want to get check raised and have to fold backdoor equity. So we turn a straight draw. He checks again. 2 checks makes me think that my king high isn't good. Likely has ace high or some underpair to the board, and I think we can get them to fold with our straight draw and our pair draws here. When you turn that kind of equity, it just makes a lot of sense to put pressure on opponents who have capped their ranges. unless they're a very sneaky opponent who check raises there pretty often, it's very easy just to barrel off your opponents, and adding to your equity gives you more reasons and more of an ability to realize, um, more of an ability to take down the pot. Just because if they fold on the turn, that's a great victory for you, even if they were ahead with ace high or an under pair. Or even if you were ahead. Nope, we have no pair, and that diamond draw is a little scary. Small raises against, from the small blind. I don't think this is a good sizing. Opponents will just play I think too correctly against you. Okay, so you get 3-bet. I'm going to defend Queen 9 suited. We're fairly deep against this player, and he's shown to be decently aggressive, so it's likely that we can either be ahead against some sort of middling suited connected hand, or we've got a lot of equity against a broad range of 3-betting hands. We flop a flush draw. Gonna definitely call here. Can fold under pairs or ace-x hands that don't connect or have different backdoor draws. Oh, this is tough. I think we have to fold here. Even if I was putting 20 in to win 20 plus 20 plus, let's say the 20 in this person's stack, that would still be, we need to win one out of every 4 times, which you don't quite win. And especially with this pot size bet, I mean, we're saying we're getting that stack 100% of the time that we hit our diamond, but that's not always the case. So I think this will fold. Right, so we're saying in the event that we win, the best case scenario happens. We spike a flush on the river. The question is, how often do we have to, even if we stacked our opponent 100% of the time, we weren't getting the correct odds on the turn to justify that call. And I mean, that does say, like, we think that our opponent's not bluffing there, and maybe our queen high in some crazy world could be good. Let's just say they have, 8-9, or I guess 8-10 suited, Jack-10 suited of diamonds, and they're just putting the pressure on. But I think we're also so rarely ahead, and the times we are not ahead, we don't have enough equity to catch up on that particular bet. Now, if they had bet, like, I don't know, $5, of course we're getting or like $10, we're getting an immediate price to call, close to immediate price to call, and then if you stack up putting like 10 in to win what they have left behind, it becomes definitely profitable to call there. But because they put most of their stack in on the turn and don't leave any of their stack back for when we spike it, I don't think it's a good spot to call. It just becomes like a math problem, and I don't think we win that math problem often enough. Would have been super nice to see a diamond on that turn. Okay. I don't think it's the best hand to 3-bet, but we don't 3-bet very often. They are fairly tight to 3-bets in against small blind versus button position. So I think it's okay. And our 10-7 suited flops okay. Not phenomenally, but with the flush draw and the straight draw, you flop okay a recent amount of the time. This is obviously unfortunate. I don't think we can call. I don't think we can Yeah, I don't think we can call, and I don't think we can 5-bet, so folding is just probably the only play. If we call there, we're getting some immediate okay odds. Obviously, again, someone who only 4-bets the top, 5% of their range, we're getting terrible odds. Not terrible, because obviously we're okay against like ace king. Not great, but okay. So I'm going to 4-bet and call it off. And I'm going to fold queen 7 suited. The reason why I was calling it off is just we started the hand with, was it, was it 43 in stacks? So not even a complete 100 big blind stack. And ace queen, I think, would figure to be ahead of some of a 5-bet jam range that had some ace bluffs. And in the event that we weren't ahead, we would be getting a decent price to make a call. A decent price to make a call with, if they have something like ace king or kings, we still have 30%. Oh, I know what our call 3-bet frequency is. So our fold to 3-bet is pretty high. But still a small sample. Just wondering like how much we've already been folding 3-bets and if we should mix in queen 7 suited as a call. Don't think we should. Still, I mean, it doesn't flop any straights, and we can have better suited hands to play. King 5 off, gonna be a fold. Slowly bringing down our VPIP. So the people on the left seem reasonable in the 25-cent, 50-cent game. Don't think there's any been super duper massive leaks being shown. Call 2-bet from blinds ace jack off. Interesting. Gonna open jack 10 off. C-bet with our backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, and our only 10 high. Also those pair outs you should not forget. Eight and off, I think I'm gonna fold. It's been a little bit too active, and it's not a particularly great hand with people with pretty high 3-bet frequencies. So we get 3-bet, which is always good news when you've got aces. I could consider calling or 4-betting, obviously. He's a pretty low 3-bet percentage, so it's probably pretty tight, which means I just want to likely get it in now. Against someone who's super aggressive, I'd probably just call and let them bluff me off on future streets. Or try to let them bluff me off, but obviously I wasn't going to be bluffed. very likely be bluffed with pocket aces. Could still be bluffed. Gonna fold king deuce suited. Not a great hand to just call with, and I don't want to go 4-betting that, given that we've been 4-betting with some decent hands, and that's not one I think we need to mix in. If you've been 4-betting just over and over and over again, and you get a hand in that spot like king dissuited, and everyone's been folding to you, I'm not sure if this is like GTO, but I do think that people are going to start fighting back, and you have to be more careful with the hands you pick as your 4-bet bluffs. And so hands like a king for king deuce suited, which may be a good bluff hand when you're super tight, isn't a great bluff hand when you're very loose, because it doesn't block the best hands, and you should expect that people are going to take notice and fight back. On the right here, if we get let into, we're going to take one for sure as a call. And we're going to see bet if there's a bluff, if there's a check. With our ace high, so our overcards, our backdoor draw. And I'm okay bloating the pot a little bit just because that backdoor draw is super strong. Both the straight and flush draw. Some people check here because they don't want to get checked to raise off their equity. And it's funny how the flush draw, it gives you more playability more than equity increase. The actual equity increase of having a suited hand that can turn a flush draw there is probably not that much until the flush draw actually comes. Because like 1 in 4 times you don't turn a flush draw. So 1 in 4 times you turn a flush draw. And then when you turn a flush draw, you add like 20% equity. So you get like 5% from having the flush draw on the flop, which is not like a huge boost, but it just really makes your hand more playable when you can bet there instead of checking. Just because you can, like, every time you have to check there, you're more likely than not to get bluffed off of your hand on later streets. Ace 3 off is a pretty bad hand, but I think it's still a call, even though we're dominated some of the time. It's not a full 3x raise, and we can flop some straight draws, and we can flop some top flush draws. So it's interesting to think about when you should start slow playing a hand like aces in that kind of situation. I think that in a small blind, big blind, a small blind button spot, I definitely like against a complete unknown. You should definitely play it straightforward as a 4-bet. But if you just because they're unknown, they're probably just like generally tighter there than they would be at any other position because they have to play out of position against you in that spot, and they get to play in position against you in all other spots. Also because this player specifically had a pretty low 3-bet percentage. I think it was 0 at the time. I think you just want to get the money in there if you can. If they check twice, I don't expect my hand to be good. We don't block anything spectacular, but we can get like a decent number of pairs to just fold here. We can have weak flushes that just check the turn because they don't want to bet and get raised, and then after the opponent checks back, decide that they have the best hand and turn it into a value hand. I think I'm just going to call. It's an under the gun opener. I don't necessarily want a 3-bet under the gun opener, even though this person's pretty loose. Gonna fold. Because we'll play out of position against them, and their range is strong. I was a little tempted. I think I was a little tempted with the dead money in the pot to turn it into 3-bet. Tough spot. I think we're just gonna fold. Could definitely have eights or a hand like 7-6 suited or 7-8 suited. Not too many ace highs, but some ace highs. Not much of a 4-better. Not a big sample. This is a lockdown board. Very big range advantage. We want to materialize as much as we can. On the left here, I decided that the best hands to check would be hands that are stronger, like ace 10 or ace queen, that might just want to realize their equity and have better showdown. And the best hands to value bet would be hands like aces, kings, and queens, and pocket jacks, obviously. So then it leaves like this middling range where you don't have ace high, um, and there aren't really any other bluffs. Like there's no flush draw bluffs or anything like that. And so there's just like this weird middling range of kind of strange things that you decided to 3-bet there, like the queen 8 suiteds or the king queen or the jack 10s, or not the jack 10s, the 10 9s, that you're just going to want to turn into your bluffs. Gonna just bet here. Pretty safe flop. Our opponent has a lot of draws and a lot of jacks. Obviously some 8s, and if they have an 8, they just stack us. Flush draws, straight draws, and jacks. All good hands to get value from. What I was trying to do there with when I was trying to explain why I bet with the queen 8 suited is I'm trying to break my range down into bets, checks, bets as bluffs, bets as value hands, and checks either as slow plays or as protection, pot control. And the reason why I'm trying to do that is to make sure that if I'm gonna bet, that I still have enough value hands, or if I'm gonna bet as a bluff, I have enough value hands in there such that um, they can't just always call me down with like their weak pairs or their ace highs. And if I'm gonna bet as a value hand, I want to make sure that I've got enough bluffs that they can call down with their weak hands, essentially finding that indifference point. And so that's kind of the exercise I go through in that spot to split up my hands into, I think they're like proper categories in order to make myself as unexploitable as possible. Gonna fold Jack 7 off. Gonna open 6-8 suited. So a pretty solid session so far, I'd say. We had that buy-in and a half that we won, or buy-in and change that we won in a heads-up table, and then we have this up like a fifth of a buy-in over here, and about a fifth of a buy-in over here on the right. So on the left, I think the best hands to bluff here are single diamonds. They give you the best draws and they block their flushes. I'm going to turn 6-8 into a check. We can also rep diamonds if they come, so I'm actually just going to continue. And if we get check raise, it's not that hard for us to just fold. I expect to just get a call if that they have a 9 or like pocket 5s or pocket 4s with a diamond. It's a very bad hand or card to bluff. If they have a pair, they're probably not going to fold. Definitely not going to fold a 10, but they probably would have check raised a 10 on the flop. But still, if they have a 9, they're almost certainly not going to fold a 9. And their range at this point is mostly 9s. You could argue for not bluffing there. But we can bluff like on all the missed diamonds, or on the diamonds that get there we can bluff, and then we can value bet when we hit our straight. So I think it's an okay place to bluff, but not a great place to bluff. Maybe one that I bluff a third of the time and don't bluff 2/3 of the time. 7-5 off in the big blind. We're pretty deep. I'm going to make this call. Almost only because we're playing fairly deep with both players, but especially this player on the button. 4-7 off, I'm going to fold. If you're asking what the difference is between the 4-7 off and the 7-5 off hand, I mean, despite the fact that 4-7 off is slightly worse, there was one less player, and this player was opening from under the gun. So his range was stronger, and we're getting a worse price. This player's pretty tight. I don't particularly want to 3-bet, and I don't want to fold. I don't recommend this play. This hand is probably just a fold. Because on flops like these, you can do nothing but fold. Yeah, I wish I had folded pre-flop. It just doesn't flop well enough. It's a good bluff hand because it blocks good strong hands, but it doesn't flop super well. And you just end up getting exposed by players who just bet flops that give them advantages over you. Eight six off, I think, is going to be a fold, even if it folds around to me. Again, these players are decently 3-bet happy, and it just doesn't play well against 3-bets, obviously. Especially a fold to under the gun. So I'm going to play a couple more orbits, and I'm going to call it. I'll probably play one more orbit on each. I do feel as if this session has mostly been me just running well. Though I mean, we didn't win all of the big pots we got into. We had to fold some of the time, or got called down in spots that were unfortunate. Or we missed our flush draws or things like that. Hit 9 off, gonna fold. Okay, I think I'm just gonna end this video here. So sit out in the big blind and yep, and then sit it over here. So yep, thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the recording, and yeah, if you have any feedback, leave it in the comments. Thanks very much. This is Ben signing off.